Would you dare open the doors of your home to a complete stranger? This is one of those questions that makes you uncomfortable just hearing it, because it touches on what's most intimate: our security, our trust, our very notion of right and wrong. And yet, there's a true story that begins exactly this way, with a simple, hard-working single father who, in the midst of his daily routine of raising a child alone, decided to take an unexpected step. He opened not just his wooden door, but the door of his life to someone he didn't know. And what happened next was so surprising that it shook an entire community. Imagine the scene. You're at home with your child, trying to keep everything in order, balancing bills, responsibilities, and the hope of providing a better future. The routine is hard enough when suddenly someone appears before you, lost, aimless, in need of shelter. What would you do? This question isn't just hypothetical, it carries real weight. After all, we've all experienced moments when we've had to make quick decisions, based not only on logic, but also on our hearts. Have you ever been there? Have you ever found yourself faced with a dilemma where helping could mean risk, but also the chance to transform a life? This single father faced this very dilemma. The curious thing is that, contrary to what many might imagine, he didn't hesitate for long. There was something about the situation that moved him beyond fear, beyond caution. It was as if empathy spoke louder than any voice of doubt. And this is where the heart of this story lies. The power of a simple gesture, the impact of an act of kindness that doesn't need to be grandiose to change destinies. What you're about to discover now may surprise you, because what seemed like just a good deed revealed a hidden truth that no one expected. When we talk about acts of kindness, we usually think of small, everyday gestures: giving up a seat on the bus, offering to help with heavy bags, buying someone a coffee. But opening your front door to a stranger, that's beyond the ordinary. It's taking a risk, trusting your instincts, believing that humanity can still be restored in times of such distrust. And that's exactly what he did. An unexpected gesture, but one loaded with meaning. And don't think this story went unnoticed. On the contrary, it spread like wildfire among neighbors, acquaintances, and later throughout the city. What seemed like a simple act of solidarity turned into a powerful narrative, one of those inspiring human stories that make us reflect on our own choices and values. Stay with me until the end, because every detail of this journey will show you that sometimes it's in the most unlikely moments that we find life's greatest lessons. This father had no wealth, nor did he live in abundance. He was an ordinary man with enormous responsibilities and challenges that many of us know well. Even so, amidst his difficulties, he decided to share what little he had. And that alone would be enough to move people. But what no one knew was that there was a hidden secret, a truth that would come to light and change the way everyone saw that stranger, and above all, that courageous father. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because understanding the impact of this gesture requires us to look beyond the surface, beyond what our eyes saw that first night. It's in this most intimate layer that the story reveals its true power. When we think about this kind of attitude, it's impossible not to reflect on our own lives. How many times have we encountered situations where we could have made a difference and hesitated? Or moments when someone reached out to us and it completely changed the course of our day or even our entire life? These memories and feelings are what deeply connect us to stories like this single father's. That's why I want to invite you to actively participate in this conversation. If this topic resonates with you, leave a comment below with what has touched you most so far, or share a personal experience where someone's kindness made a difference. Your words may inspire others who come across this video. I also want to sincerely ask you to like this video. It seems like a small gesture, But this simple click shows YouTube that this message is worth sharing with more people. And if you feel that stories like this deserve to be told and reach more hearts, subscribe to the channel. Your participation here is what makes this space grow and reach more people with this kind of content that inspires, moves, and transforms. And it's precisely because every interaction of yours has this power that I continue to bring you stories like this. Because deep down, we all need to be reminded from time to time that humanity still holds beautiful examples of courage and compassion. Now, moving on, he wasn't a famous man, nor was he someone seeking public recognition. He was simply a single father, someone who shouldered the burden and, at the same time, the honor of raising his son alone. His simple life reflected the reality of many, waking up early, facing a grueling workday, coming home and still having the energy to make dinner, help with homework, and ensuring that despite the hardships, home was a place of affection and security. There were no luxuries, but there was something worth more than any wealth. An unconditional love that manifested itself in every gesture. This man lived a tight routine with bills that seemed to never let up and worries that insisted on appearing when the lights went out at night. But despite this, he refused to let his son feel the weight of his anguish. His mindset was clear: to create an environment where his son could dream big without being stifled by financial limitations or the absence of a traditional family structure. And this is precisely where the true power of his story begins. Life had forced him to make difficult decisions, but it had also given him a more sensitive vision of human needs. While many saw only the surface, an ordinary man racing against time, there was a hidden truth behind the scenes. His resilience was greater than any obstacle. His determination surpassed the fear of others' judgment. This father understood, perhaps better than anyone, what it means to fight every day for something that seems simple, but requires immense courage. Raising a child alone is, in itself, an act of transformation. It's facing nights of uncertainty and still smiling in the morning, knowing someone depends on you. His neighbors often commented on how he seemed to always be rushing around. There was never enough time and almost never enough money, but there was always plenty of heart. And that was precisely what marked him, the ability to put love into every detail. This trait in his personality is what explains the surprising decision he would later make. It wasn't just sudden kindness. It was the result of a journey of daily choices, of a mindset focused on positive impact, even if silent. It is in this contrast between simplicity and grandeur that we find the true meaning of his story. Love for his son was the flame that drove him, but his compassion for others was the reflection of someone who had experienced vulnerability firsthand. Perhaps that's why his empathy was so authentic, so natural. And perhaps that's why his attitude surprised an entire city. Now, I want to delve even deeper into this topic, because understanding who he was helps us understand the magnitude of the decision he made when he decided to open his home to a stranger. This isn't just a story about kindness, it's about choices that reveal character, about moments that define destinies. Comment: that makes sense to me. It was a cold night, the kind where the wind seems to carry not only the chilly air, but also a sense of loneliness through the nearly empty streets. The single father was returning home after another long day, balancing the weariness of his routine with the determination that never left him. It was on his way back that something unusual happened. As he turned the corner, he spotted a man sitting on the sidewalk, leaning against a damp, dimly lit wall. The stranger appeared utterly vulnerable, worn clothes, trembling hands, a look lost between hope and resignation. For a moment, he considered simply keeping walking. After all, how many times do we pass people like this every day? How many times do we choose to look away, as if invisibility were a form of defense against the weight of compassion. But something inside him wouldn't allow him to remain indifferent. There was something different about that moment, almost like a silent revelation, as if life were presenting him with a decision capable of having not only an immediate but also a profound impact on his journey. The unknown man didn't ask for anything, didn't raise his voice, didn't extend a hand. He simply stood there, his presence marked by silence. And perhaps it was precisely this detail that touched the father's heart. The absence of words, the lack of a direct request, allowed him to see the hidden truth of someone who had lost the strength to even ask for help. It was at that moment that a wave of empathy washed over him, reminding him of how many times he himself had felt vulnerable, albeit in different ways. His mind quickly weighed the circumstances of the situation. What if it were me? What if it were my son in that position? This kind of thought doesn't arise out of thin air, but from the sensitivity built over the years, from the mindset of someone who knows the value of every gesture and the awareness that transformation often begins with small, courageous decisions. He stopped, took a deep breath, and realized that this unexpected encounter wasn't a coincidence. It was a silent invitation from life to choose between walking straight ahead or acting with compassion. As he approached, he noticed a mixture of embarrassment and relief in the stranger's eyes, as if he weren't used to being noticed, much less treated with dignity. This detail moved him even more, as it showed him the impact that social invisibility can have on a person. And there, between one glance and another, an invisible bond was created. No words had yet been exchanged, but there was something connecting them, a shared humanity, the knowledge that they were both made of the same fragility, the same need for care and belonging. In that moment, the single father no longer saw a stranger on the sidewalk, but rather a human being whose story, marked by loss or bad decisions, still held revelations that could surprise. He didn't know who that man was, nor what lay behind that situation, but he knew he was facing a choice that would define much more than a cold night. He was facing a moment capable of revealing, in the future, truths that could shock not only him, but the entire city. Now, I want to delve even deeper into this topic, because understanding how this encounter happened is essential to understanding the power of human decisions when they intersect with the vulnerability of others. And before we move on, comment, "I'm on this journey too." He stood still for a few seconds that seemed too long for a cold sidewalk. His heart wanted to take 2 steps forward, but his head insisted on retreating. The first image that came to him was his son sleeping, hugging his pillow, safe behind the Dugar he had sworn to protect, help, or protect himself. The question pierced him like a lightning bolt. Natural fear appeared before any rational explanation. What if this man posed a risk? What if entering the house would also open the door to problems he wasn't ready to face? On the other hand, there was a genuine compassion that never ceased, as if the wind blowing on his face reminded him that cold doesn't choose its destiny and hunger waits for no occasion. That tension, almost invisible to anyone passing by on the street, was a real battle, the struggle between the instinct for self-defense and the courage to see the other without filters. He imagined mental headlines no one would want to read, reviewed improvised safety protocols he'd created behind the scenes of single parenthood, and tested hypotheses about how to navigate the situation with the least possible exposure. At the same time, flashes of his own journey surfaced like little movies. The times strangers held a door for him, offered him a meal, offered advice in the bus line, or simply smiled when everything seemed to be falling apart. They weren't great saviors, they were ordinary people. And there was a hidden truth there. Life goes on stitched together by discrete threads of kindness that don't show up in the world's reports. but sustain the fabric of our humanity. His mind was calculating, but the look in the man's eyes dismantled those calculations. There was no aggression, only weariness. There was no threat, only a presence that demanded shelter before even speaking. He thought of his own home, the boundaries he needed to maintain, the rules he'd invented to protect his son and himself. The decision, he knew, couldn't be impulsive, but neither could it be cold. I was facing one of those moments when life demands more than ready-made answers. It demands listening, sensitivity, prudence, and courage in equal measure. Decisions like these don't fit into a formula. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because what was at stake wasn't simply whether to allow or deny entry to a stranger. It was how he wanted to teach his son to read the world. He didn't want to raise a cynical child, incapable of trust. Nor did he want to raise someone naive, oblivious to risks. Balance is an art that fatherhood practices every day. And there, before that man, he sensed there was a chance to practice precisely this point of balance. Caring without exposing oneself completely. Welcoming without losing a sense of responsibility. This mindset doesn't arise out of thin air. It's honed in the friction between fear and compassion, in the friction between what the street demands and what the heart calls. He considered alternatives, offering food right there, getting a blanket, finding a public shelter, calling a social services contact he'd previously noted. Each option had a different impact, different limits, and different time frames. Home was the greatest gesture, the most intimate frontier, but he also knew that transformation sometimes requires closeness. The dilemma was clear. How far could one go without compromising safety? Which decision would generate real care and not just a momentary relief of one's own conscience? Honesty with oneself was essential, not to confuse haste with hunch, impulse with purpose. The stranger kept his eyes lowered, as if he didn't want to embarrass anyone. This posture curiously reduced the tension. When someone doesn't compete for space, fear tends to fade. Still, the father took in the scene from the sides, dim lighting, minimal movement, neighbors just a few windows away. He didn't underestimate the variables. He pointed to the horizon with attentive thought. If I open up, how can I guarantee boundaries? If I don't open up, how will I sleep knowing I've left someone else out in the cold? Two legitimate questions, two possible paths, one responsibility. In the background were memories of doors he'd already received, slammed in his life, and of a single door that opened at a crucial moment. It was there that his view of compassion shifted. It wasn't about romanticizing risks, but about marshalling one's own courage. Sometimes helping means offering water and a path. Sometimes it means offering shelter and silence. Sometimes it means simply offering a name, a look, and recognition. What exactly was the help he needed that night? He reached into his pocket, felt for his keys, and the simple touch of metal brought back his awareness of his limits. Opening isn't the same as opening wide. Welcoming isn't the same as self-denial. In his head, a quick script of conduct began to take shape. Introduce himself first, ask his name, understand the story before inviting him. Establish a time, a common area, and keep his son out of unnecessary exposure. He knew that mature compassion has a method, and this method doesn't dilute tenderness. It merely shapes it so it doesn't shatter at the first sign of friction. Prudence doesn't kill empathy, it preserves it. And empathy, when preserved, has the power to transform, lasting through cold nights and arriving intact at dawn. The wind interrupted his thoughts and brought the scene back to him. The man was rubbing his hands. His skin spoke of days without comfort. The father imagined a hot dish on the table, a clean blanket, the dignity of a bath, the relief of a sofa. He also imagined the conversation with his son, explaining that helping can sometimes be scary, but that fear and courage are not enemies. They are compasses that, when aligned, point to more humane decisions. In his journey, that dilemma was concrete proof of what he had been teaching: a good heart with a sound mind, openness with limits, generosity with responsibility. As the street passed indifferently, he understood his own hesitation as part of the process, not an excuse. He didn't need to solve the world, he just needed to respond to that night with the best truth. He had. Perhaps the city would never know, perhaps no one would see, but the one who needs to see first is always his own conscience. The decision that was maturing within him wasn't the result of impulse, but of an accumulation of small revelations that life gives to those who remain available. When we protect what we love, we are also invited to expand what we call home. When we welcome someone, we also welcome parts of ourselves that were asking for space. He straightened his shoulders, took a step that closed the distance and, in a low voice so as not to startle, rehearsed his first words. He knew that from that moment on, everything could change, not necessarily in a grand way, but in a significant way. Because true change almost always begins this way: discreet, intimate, with a gesture born in the realm of silent decisions and gradually revealing an impact no one had mapped. What if there was something in that man that the entire city needed to know? What if that night's encounter was the missing piece to a larger story, hidden behind the scenes? He felt clearly that he was facing a divide. Not the kind of divide that screams, but the kind that whispers and yet changes course. Prudence still sat beside compassion, both summoned to a choice that would hold until morning. The clock ticked cold minutes, and life, insistent, demanded an answer. An answer that, one way or another, would tell the son who his father is, and himself who he wants to remain. He took a deep breath, almost as if asking his own heart to be silent, and decided he couldn't let fear dominate. There was a risk, of course, but there was also a stronger call: intuition. That quiet voice, often drowned out by the noise of worries, now spoke firmly within him. He knew it took courage to turn into action what his conscience had already whispered: that sometimes compassion requires crossing the comfortable line of absolute safety. And so, amid the tension of the cold street, he made a decision that would change not only that night, but his entire journey. With simple words, he offered the stranger something many would refuse: temporary shelter, a minimum space of dignity. This gesture, though seemingly small, carried immense depth. It was as if, by opening his door, he was also opening a new chapter in his own story. The single father, who already carried so many responsibilities, was now adding another layer to his life's learning. It wasn't about heroism, but about humanity. And courage wasn't shown in the absence of fear, but precisely in the act of moving forward despite acknowledging it. This mindset of following intuition, of trusting inner discernment, became in that instant a hidden truth revealed before him. As he walked side by side with the man to his house, each step seemed to weigh more than the last. Not because it was an unbearable weight, but because he was aware of the impact of his choice. He wondered if the entire city, accustomed to haste and individualism, would understand his gesture or dismiss it as naivete. But deep down, it didn't matter. His decision wasn't for an audience, but for his own conscience. It was a choice made behind the scenes, where there are no cameras or applause, only the truth about who you are when no one is watching. The stranger seemed surprised, almost in disbelief. Maybe you'd heard many no's before. Maybe you'd felt doors closing before you even asked. But there was a yes, and that yes held more than a roof over your head. It held the chance for a new beginning, proof that there's still room for genuine compassion in the world. The single father knew he didn't have much to offer beyond the basics: a couch, a blanket, some simple food. But he had something greater than that, a willingness to see beyond appearances, to believe that even a stranger can carry within them a valuable story. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because what happened there wasn't just an isolated act of kindness. It was a conscious choice to practice an inner transformation, to align mindset and action, to allow a simple gesture to become a milestone in one's own life journey. When one decides to make space for another, one also opens space within oneself for new revelations, for new perspectives on what it means to love and be loved. And in that moment, as the door to his house opened, it wasn't just a stranger entering, it was also the opportunity to write a new page, both for himself and for those before him. The first night was one of those nights where time seems to drag, where every little detail looms large in the mind. The single father, after making the courageous decision to open his door, felt the weight of responsibility fall on his shoulders like never before. He wasn't just welcoming a stranger, he was putting the safety of his most precious possession at risk, his son. So, as his guest settled into the simple living room sofa, he silently observed every movement, alert for any sign that might confirm or deny the decision he had made. The atmosphere, despite being protected by the walls of the house, was charged with a mixture of distrust and compassion, as if both feelings were in a duel within his heart. The son, too young to understand adult dilemmas, looked curiously at his new temporary resident. Children often see beyond what meets the eye, and in the unfamiliar man's expression, the boy seemed to notice something that soothed his father's tension. Perhaps it was the weary look in his eyes. Perhaps it was the way he held the borrowed blanket with almost childlike gratitude, like someone receiving an unexpected gift. His father sensed it, and even without saying anything, it was as if a thread of trust had begun to be woven there, silently. But still, he couldn't completely let go of his vigilance. Every noise in the house that night seemed amplified, as if the darkness were capable of giving voice to the fears that tried to whisper that he had made a mistake. As the stranger settled in, offering a simple thank you, the father noticed something in his eyes. It wasn't the look of someone seizing an opportunity, but of someone carrying weight, pain, and perhaps even regret. It was the kind of look that speaks louder than words, conveying a hidden truth difficult to hide. The mood began to take on different nuances. It was no longer just distrust, but also a seed of empathy beginning to sprout. After all, who hasn't, at some point in their life, needed support in some way? Who hasn't experienced a journey where, to move forward, they needed another person's outstretched hand? These reflections began to cross the father's mind, while protecting his son remained a priority. Before going to bed, the stranger thanked him again. It wasn't a formal gratitude, the kind one says simply out of politeness, but a visible, almost stifled emotion. He couldn't disguise the impact that gesture of kindness had caused. His teary eyes revealed more than words could. They revealed the experience of someone who had likely spent many nights on the streets, facing cold, rejection, and invisibility. Now, in that simple house, he found not only physical shelter, but a space of restored humanity. And this detail didn't go unnoticed by his father. It was in that instant that he realized that, although he was still afraid, there was something bigger happening there. Something that couldn't be explained by logic alone. But that involved a deeper transformation. The son ended up falling asleep early, without carrying the same fears as his father. His innocence became a kind of reminder. When you look with the eyes of your heart, you can see possibilities where many see only threats. The father, on the other hand, stayed awake longer, reflecting on decisions, on the fine line between protection and compassion. He knew he had taken a risk, but he also felt he had obeyed an inner calling that could not be ignored. As The guest breathed deeply on the sofa, perhaps feeling at peace for the first time in a long time. The father understood that night, his home held more than tired bodies. It held stories, it held wounds, it held the chance for a journey of transformation for everyone there. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because that first night was just the beginning of a series of revelations that would change the way the father saw life, how the guest would rediscover his dignity, and how even the son would learn lessons that would last forever. Trust, so hard to earn, began to blossom behind the scenes of that unexpected encounter, and every detail was an invitation to rethink our mindset, impact, and the choices we make every day. The following days were marked by a different silence, no longer as heavy as that of the first night, but filled with small signs that something was changing within that simple house. The single father, who had initially approached the decision with trepidation, began to realize that living with this unknown man was taking on nuances that went far beyond what he expected. It wasn't just about offering temporary shelter, but about building an experience that, in every detail, demonstrated the power of empathy, trust, and solidarity. Small gestures began to replace the initial fear, as if life was showing that when you open a door, it's not just a stranger who enters, it's also a chance to see hidden truths that often go unnoticed in the rush of everyday life. At their first shared meal, the atmosphere was still shy. The father set the table simply, serving rice, beans, and a little meat, while his son observed everything naturally, as if this visitor were already part of the family. The man, visibly embarrassed, tried to refuse the dish, saying he didn't want to make trouble. But the father, with gentle firmness, insisted. And it was in that moment that the first bond of trust was strengthened. Sitting at the table together was more than a meal. It was a symbolic gesture of inclusion, a reminder that no one needs to face life alone, and this seemingly banal scene carried a profound emotional impact. By sharing bread, they also shared humanity. In the following days, other gestures began to appear, almost unplanned. The guest, noticing her father's daily burden with household chores, began to help spontaneously. She washed the dishes after meals, swept the living room, and even tried to fix a cabinet. Door that had been loose for some time. These were simple gestures, yet full of meaning. The father, who had initially been cautious, began to see in this attitude a revealing truth. Behind the tired appearance and the unknown past, there was someone willing to give back, to participate, to show gratitude with concrete actions. This unexpected collaboration lightened not only the weight of routine, but also the invisible barriers that separated their hearts. The son, as always, seemed to understand everything even more deeply. His innocence led him to treat the visitor without reservation, inviting him to play, telling stories about school, and even offering his toys. This childlike purity had a transformative impact because it showed that sometimes trust is more natural than distrust. The father observed this with a mixture of pride and reflection. If his son could offer so much without fear, couldn't he, an adult marked by worries and responsibilities, also learn to let go of the weight of distrust? This realization shook his mindset, challenged his beliefs, and brought to light the hidden truth that generosity is often a two-way street. With each gesture, the atmosphere in the house was transformed. What began as a temporary shelter, fraught with tension, began to take on the contours of genuine coexistence. The father felt he was not only helping, but also being helped. Because this stranger brought more than a tired body into the home, he brought experiences, lessons, and even a mirror for him to reflect on his choices, his decisions, and his own impact on the world. The behind-the-scenes nature of this coexistence was shaping something much greater than the three could have imagined, a journey of silent but powerful transformation. Now I want to delve even deeper into this topic because these small gestures of coexistence were just the beginning of revelations that would change not only how they saw each other, but also how they would view the value of compassion and trust. And it is precisely at this point that the story begins to take on new contours, revealing that what seemed like mere temporary help hid something that would forever mark their lives. Little by little, word that the single father had taken in a stranger began to spread through the neighborhood. It was impossible not to notice the new temporary resident, especially in a community where everything seemed to quickly become more vocal. Neighbors, accustomed to observing the quiet and disciplined routine of this father who raised his son alone, now saw a new figure circulating, helping with carrying bags, sweeping the sidewalk, or simply sitting on the bench in front of the house in the late afternoon. This change provoked varied reactions, each revealing more about people's mindsets and beliefs than about the situation itself. Some looked on in admiration, impressed by his courage and generosity. He's always been a good-hearted man, but this attitude is beyond anything I've ever seen, murmured a woman on the street, quietly watching from her window. For her and other neighbors who shared this sentiment, this gesture had a powerful impact, almost like a living example that there are still people willing to risk themselves in the name of compassion. This sight lit a spark of hope, reminding them that simple acts can restore faith in humanity and show that even in an increasingly distrustful world, there is still room for transformative gestures. But on the other hand, there were also looks of distrust laden with judgment. Some whispered in the corners, "What if this man is dangerous? What if he puts their child at risk?" The fearful mentality spoke louder to them. It was as if the idea of opening the door to a stranger was unbearable, an inconceivable decision that could only lead to trouble. These comments echoed with hidden truths that each person holds within themselves. The eternal battle between trusting and protecting oneself, between believing in goodness and suspecting ulterior motives. This contrast in the neighborhood's reaction revealed something fascinating. While some applauded the move as a gesture of compassion and courage, others criticized it as a reckless decision. And in the middle of it all was the father, aware that every choice carries risks, but also opportunities. He knew that the journey he had embarked on was not just about offering shelter to someone, but about challenging entrenched mindsets, showing that the impact of a decision can extend beyond the confines of one's own home and resonate throughout the community. The neighborhood children, for example, saw the situation differently than the adults. For them, the visitor wasn't a danger but a novelty. They approached curiously, asked questions, and soon treated him naturally, as if he had always been part of their daily lives. This childlike purity revealed an uncomfortable revelation. Perhaps fear and distrust aren't rooted in reality, but in how we choose to interpret it. Perhaps life is made up of hidden layers we can't immediately see, and which only reveal themselves when we decide to take the first step toward the other. The father observed all this calmly. He was unfazed by the suspicious looks, but he also didn't ignore the responsibility he bore. He knew that every gesture was observed, every detail commented on, and that in a way, his attitude was under constant judgment. However, instead of feeling this as a burden, he saw it as an opportunity for transformation, a silent invitation for the neighborhood to also reflect on the value of empathy. After all, it wasn't just about him or his guest. It was about the collective capacity to choose compassion over fear, solidarity over indifference. And the curious thing is that, as the days went by, even some of the critics began to change their perspective. They noticed the guest's small gestures, helping with groceries, greeting with respect, playing with street children, and little by little, what was once seen as a risk began to be interpreted as an act of humanity. The impact of the father's actions reached far beyond his home. It was shaking the foundations of how that community viewed trust, courage, and generosity. Now, I want to delve even deeper into this topic because the story didn't stop with the neighbors' reactions. What was about to be revealed would bring a new layer of meaning, showing that behind that seemingly simple decision lay revelations capable of transforming not just one family, but an entire town's view of what it truly means to welcome. It was as if every detail held a mystery. The stranger, though polite and grateful, had a reserved, almost calculated demeanor. His gestures were delicate, but his eyes seemed to constantly scan the room as if on constant alert. Sometimes he would pause mid-sentence, as if afraid to reveal too much. Other times, he spoke with an unexpected sparkle in his eyes, like someone harboring memories he couldn't share. The single father sensed this, and though he tried not to judge, he sensed a hidden truth behind that silent figure. It was as if each smile were a layer hiding something greater, and each pause, a space that revealed signs that this man's story was not ordinary. The son, innocent and curious, asked simple questions, but even his answers carried a weight unbecoming of someone simply seeking shelter. There was an intensity in his gaze that blended pain, regret, and hope, as if caught between a difficult past and the possibility of a different future. And this began to stir not only the father's mind, but also his heart. After all, how much can you trust a stranger? How could you know if this man was simply vulnerable, or if there were secrets lurking within him that could change their entire perception of him? With each passing day, the mysterious signs accumulated. A refused phone call, a stare into space, a habit of waking in the middle of the night and silently pacing the house. The single father found himself torn between two mindsets: fear, which screamed at him to keep his distance and protect his family, and compassion, which insisted on seeing the best in people. This tension created an almost palpable atmosphere, as if the house were filled with questions no one dared ask aloud. And it is precisely at this point that the story begins to take on new depth, because every gesture, every word seemed to carry symbolic weight, as if a clue to an even greater revelation. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because this is where the true impact of this journey comes in. When kindness meets mystery, and decisions that seem small become revelations capable of changing entire destinies. The air of mystery that hung over the house began to morph into something greater, as if all the pieces of a puzzle were about to fall into place. The single father had already noticed the signs, but still hadn't had the courage to ask directly. There was something about this man that simultaneously inspired trust and raised questions, until one detail changed everything. An unexpected conversation, a nearly whispered confession, a truth he could no longer hide. It was as if, suddenly, all the masks fell away. The stranger revealed his identity, and he wasn't just a wandering man seeking shelter. His story was fraught with pain, difficult choices, and a personal transformation that seemed straight out of a movie script. He had lost more than material possessions. He had lost connections, dignity, and for a time, even his faith in humanity. The silence of the nights, the stares into space, the restrained gestures, it all made sense now. He was fleeing, yes, but not from something illegal or obscure. He was fleeing from his own scars and trying to rebuild a life. When the truth came out, emotion overwhelmed him. The single father understood that the encounter wasn't a coincidence, but one of those intersections in life where two journeys intersect to unleash powerful revelations. When the town learned the story, it couldn't remain indifferent. Ordinary people rallied to support. Neighbors who were previously suspicious became supportive, And that initial gesture of offering shelter transformed into a collective movement of empathy. The impact was immediate and profound. The revelation revealed not only who he was, but also laid bare the reality of many who live unseen by society. This story was moving not only for the secret revealed, but for the transformation in mindset it provoked. Suddenly, it was no longer about a stranger entering a home, but about how simple decisions can open doors to gigantic changes, both in the lives of those helping and those being helped. Now, I want to delve even deeper into this topic because this moment isn't just about discovering an identity, but about how truth, when revealed, can heal wounds, restore connections, and even inspire an entire community to see the value of compassion. The revelation wasn't confined to the walls of that simple house. As soon as the truth began to spread, whether through curious neighbors or through the first local news reports that captured the essence of the story, the entire town began to see the man differently. What was once just a stranger, sheltered by a single father, became a living symbol of resilience and transformation. The initial shock was inevitable. Many were surprised to discover the weight this man carried, the losses he had suffered, the difficult decisions that shaped his life. But quickly, this shock turned into something much greater: admiration and compassion. People who had previously been suspicious began to approach. Neighbors who had once watched from afar began knocking on doors with offers of help, food, clothing, or even words of encouragement. The atmosphere, which had initially been permeated with distrust, now vibrated with a new spirit of solidarity. It was as if this revelation had lifted an invisible veil, making everyone realize that behind every unfamiliar face may lie a story of struggle, pain, and above all, of overcoming. This collective awakening generated a powerful current. Families in the community began sharing their own stories of hardship, creating a space for empathy and listening that had previously been lacking. The single father, who simply wanted to open his door out of compassion, saw his gesture multiply into dozens of similar actions. Local restaurants offered to provide meals, volunteers organized small campaigns, and little by little, the entire city began moving toward a common purpose: restoring the dignity of someone who had been invisible for so long. The most interesting thing is that this reaction wasn't limited to a wave of material aid. There was also a profound transformation in the collective mindset. People began to rethink their own prejudices, question past decisions, and reflect on how many times they had judged someone without knowing the hidden truth they carried. This shift in perspective had a direct impact on how the community began to deal not only with that man, but with all those who, in some way, live on the margins. Now, I want to delve even deeper into this topic because what happened there shows that when the truth comes to light, it not only liberates those who bear it, but also transforms those who receive it. It's a process that generates impact, reveals the hidden depths of the human condition, and reminds us that every act of solidarity can trigger a collective journey of transformation. The decision to open his doors to a stranger not only transformed the life of the man seeking shelter, but also sparked a silent and profound change within the single father's own home. The son, still young, observed every detail with the pure attention of someone who learns by example. He saw his father balance courage and fear, compassion and prudence, and understood, even without words, that those choices carried a greater value than any lesson taught in school books. It was as if each gesture, each welcoming word, and each caring look constructed before him a new way of seeing the world, not only as a place of uncertainty, but also as a space of possibilities where love and solidarity can be real forces of transformation. The father, in turn, felt challenged and strengthened at the same time. The routine already demanded more of him than most could imagine. Supporting the household, caring for his son, facing society's silent judgment for being a single man performing roles that many still believe belong to a mother. And now, with yet another responsibility under his roof, he discovered within himself an even more resilient mindset. The guest's presence was not only a burden, but a mirror that reflected the greatness of his own decisions. With each passing day, he realized that true strength lay not only in protecting, but also in making space, in taking risks, in trusting. And it was at this point that the father-son relationship deepened in an almost invisible, yet incredibly powerful way. The boy didn't just admire, he participated in the journey. In small gestures like sharing a plate of food, lending a toy, or offering a shy smile, he became part of the healing process for someone life had wounded, and without realizing it, he learned values that would accompany him throughout his journey: compassion, courage, empathy, and the certainty that kindness, when practiced, returns in unexpected ways. This collective impact within the home became an invisible foundation that brought father and son even closer. Their complicity grew. Evening conversations gained new depth, silences became charged with meaning, and even simple moments, like sitting down together for dinner, took on a new emotional dimension. It was as if that guest, with his story marked by revelations and pain, had become a link, a catalyst that cemented the bond between them, showing that even in the shadows of hardship, beauty and growth can be found. Now, I want to go even deeper into this subject because when we understand how life presents us with choices that test our limits, we also discover how much these decisions shape not only who we are, but who those who walk alongside us will become. Little by little, the man who arrived at the single father's door with a heavy countenance, a suspicious look, and slumped shoulders began to transform. Before everyone's eyes, the shelter offered wasn't just a roof against the cold or a plate of food on the table. It was a silent invitation to begin again. And when someone in a vulnerable state is touched by a gesture of genuine kindness, something within them awakens, as if life offers a second chance to rediscover the hope that seemed lost. The days that were once marked by uncertainty began to take on a new rhythm. The stranger, who seemed to carry only defeats, began to show traces of dignity that time and hardship had erased. It was visible in small actions, the effort to help with chores, the gratitude in his eyes, the way his posture lifted a little more each morning. As if each gesture from father and son was rebuilding, brick by brick, the trust he had lost in the world. This transformation process wasn't immediate or magical, but it had the power of true change, the kind that comes from within. There were still marks of pain, scars from past choices, ghosts of mistakes made. But little by little, the compassion he found within that home was able to silence the voices of fear and despair. And that's precisely when mindsets begin to shift, when someone realizes they're not defined solely by what happened, but also by what might happen from now on. This revelation, this hidden truth, becomes a turning point in anyone's journey. Most impressively, this transformation wasn't confined to the stranger's interior. It spilled over. Neighbors, who had previously been suspicious, now began to look at him with greater curiosity. People who heard the rumors of the story found there a living example of how simple acts can generate a collective impact. The man, who had previously seemed invisible, now gained space in conversations, inspired reflection, and aroused empathy. He had been rescued not only from the street or from loneliness, but also from social invisibility. And the single father, witnessing this change, understood something even deeper, that his gesture not only offered dignity to another man, but also taught his son, and perhaps the entire community, that true strength lies in the ability to see beyond appearances and believe in the hidden potential within every human being. It was as if that shelter had become the stage for a grand revelation, that even life's darkest moments can become powerful scenes when someone decides to reach out. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because the way we react to opportunities to help can reveal a lot about who we are and at the same time open doors to stories we never imagined we would witness. What's most striking about this story is how something that began so simply managed to unfold into a true chain of transformation. A single father opening his door to a stranger might be seen as an isolated act of courage or even recklessness by some, but the hidden truth behind this decision was much deeper. It generated ripples that spread far beyond the living room where it all began. It's as if a stone had been thrown into a still lake, and each gesture of compassion created ripples that reached people far away from that first scene. The son, observing his father's actions, learned in practice that generosity isn't taught just in words, but primarily through real decisions, the kind that require sacrifice and trust. At the same time, neighbors who had previously been suspicious began to question their own attitudes. The story spread throughout the community, and with it a reflection arose. How many times have we turned a blind eye out of fear or comfort? How many opportunities to help have gone unnoticed because we preferred the security of our routines to the risk of surrender? This is the kind of revelation that causes discomfort, but also opens the way for genuine changes in mindset. It is in the confrontation between our certainties and the courage of those who dare to act that the most powerful transformations are born. And it didn't stop there. The stranger who received shelter and dignity also became a mirror for many. His journey made it clear that no one is forever condemned to the scars of the past, and that a single opportunity can rewrite entire chapters of a life. This truth, often hidden behind the scenes of our haste, reminds us that small acts carry within them great potential. Sharing a meal, offering a bed, listening without judgment. All of these may seem insignificant, but they carry the power to rebuild hope where it once existed. This journey shows us that compassion isn't limited to the moment it happens. It reverberates, it inspires, it creates new stories from the first. Each person who heard of this gesture began to carry within themselves the seed of a possibility. What if I acted like this too? What if I had the courage to make myself available to others, even without guarantees? It is in this space between doubt and action that humanity reveals its greatness. Now I want to delve even deeper into this topic, because the real issue isn't just the gesture itself, but the multiplier effect it creates, and how we can learn to generate this kind of impact on our own journeys. If you've made it this far, it's because this story spoke to your heart in some way. And that's exactly why I want to invite you to continue this journey with me. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next stories, because each one offers a unique learning experience, a lesson that can transform the way we see life. Also, leave a comment with the phrase, "I'm with you until the end," so I know you were there through every detail and walked side by side with me until now. This further strengthens this community and shows how much we're together on this journey of compassion and hope. Oh, and of course, leave a like, because that's how YouTube understands this content has value and can reach more people who need to hear messages like this. And before you leave, there's a video here that complements this topic and will make you reflect even more. Click it and stay with me there.